Good evening and good afternoon, wherever you are. We are going to continue in chapter 2 in Perek Bet in Tanya. We may finish it tonight, even though it looks like there's quite a bit to cover. We'll see if we get through. What I do want to do is I want to give a little synopsis of where we're holding. And when we start, I'm going to go back a few lines to right over here where it says Kit Mashal. It's only about, we're only going to repeat about 3 lines. Okay. So I'll leave the cursor over here. First word on the line is kiveyachol, and then right afterward kimashal. It's partway through chapter 2 if you don't have the same printing. Subject of this chapter, of course, is the nefesh elokit, the godly soul. And it originally started talking from the perspective of how the neshama elokit is different from everything else in creation, that Hashem did everything with ma'amarim, with asar ma'amarot, actually. His spoken word was what brought everything into existence. When it came to the neshama of Adam, it was breathing the breath of life into him. It was, we say, the pasuk in Iyov, chelek elokah mima'al. It was, in a literal sense, mamash, but again, speaking from a spiritual sense, a part of God invested into each person, into each Jew. And then we went a step further, and we're no longer going to compare speech and breath, but now we're going to go even deeper. We're going to go to the concept of machashava. And we said that just like the human being has a machashava, just like the father has a machashava when he's about to be with his wife, that this either, as it was believed in those days, the sperm originated in the brain, or just the brain is what got everything into motion, that initial moment of conception began in the brain and the machashava of the father, and therefore then it was brought to into the mother's body, and the baby was incubated for 9 months inside the mother. And when the baby was born, if you were to work your way all the way backwards, it goes back to the machashava, the brain of the father. So too, Hashem's machashava brought into existence the neshama elokit. Biggest difference, of course, or I shouldn't say biggest, but the giant difference, of course, is ki lo machshavotai machshavotechem. It's not that God thinks differently, but rather, yes, conceived. So yes, very good. Excellent. It's not that God thinks differently. It's that the concept of thought by God and the concept of thought by us are very different animals. On the one hand, we have there's the me, there's I, there's my ability to think. There's my ability then to put that into action. But by Hashem, it's all one. And as the Rambam told us last week, and he quoted the Rambam, this is something that we cannot completely in any way, shape, or form understand, but we can at least get a general idea that Hashem's thought process, again in quotes, is very different. Baruch gozer kayem. Baruch oseh v'reshit. Hashem's thought brings it to action itself. And when the process now, we came to the point of how is it, if the case is that all the nishamot come from Hashem, if that's the initial source, how is it that there's so many different types of nishamot in this world? How is it possible that we are not all the same when it comes to our neshama? So what we're going to do is we're going to go back a couple lines to right here where it says Kit Mashal. Let me just do this. Right there. We're going to pick it up at that word, Kit Mashal. I'm going to repeat a little bit of what we just said verbally. We're going to look at it inside now. And then we're going to look at a couple of slides along the way and hopefully have a little bit of fun. Not fun, but it'll be an interesting learning experience, I hope, for all of us. So, and this is something I just mentioned verbally. Again, this is what we did last week. In a fashion, in a parable of a child, a ben, a son, who comes from the moach ha'av, who comes to the brain, the machashavot of the father. That even the toenails of the baby also initiated and started in the brain of the father, and can be found, I'm going to use the modern term, in the DNA of the toenails of the child, comes from the father. How? Where did this all come from? During the time period when this original combination of the two DNAs, the mother and the father, are inside the mother now. And they went down from one level to another, to change. What happens when if you were to take a look under a microscope and look at the moment after conception of what you have there, you don't have toenails, you don't have a brain, it's nothing. It's nothing except for what it says in the Pirkei Avot, tipa sucha. And yet what happens during the course of time, during the time that the baby is growing inside the mother, things change. There are parts of the original DNA that become the brain, that become the stomach, that become the toenails. However, in spite of the fact that they are going down from one level to another, some become a brain, some part of it becomes the toenails. Odena kishura umyuchedet.
It's fine. Can't see anything.
Hold on. Okay, 1 minute. Okay. Odenu miyuchad, kshura umyuchedet biyichud nifla ve'atzum b'mahuta ve'atzmuta harishon shayta tipat moach ha'av. Every single thing. I'm asking over to make sure you're all on mute. Okay, because I have some that's not.
It's substandard. We don't need it.
I need everyone to be on mute. Let me see if I can find. There we go. Okay. In spite of the fact that, and if you can picture in your mind going down in levels from this tipa, the tipa zera, the tipa of the sperm, and the combination with the woman, with the egg, that started off at this almost literally this microscopic amount. And now it goes down, part become the brain, part become the shoulders, part become the intestines, part becomes everything else, the knees, and down to the toenails. In spite of that, everything is still connected uniquely in an unbelievable way to the original tipa in the moach of the father. Meaning you can trace back everything in that child all the way back to the original machashava in the brain of the father. V'gam achshav, and also now, beben yinikat hatziporonayim, v'chiyutam nimshechet mehamoach shebarosh. So that you work your way backwards in a sense that even the toenails get their chiyut, get their life source originating from that father, from his brain. K'di'ita b'Gemara, as it says in the Gemara, Loven, I'm just going to read this, and part of this I'm not going to do. Loven shemimenu gidim v'atzamot v'tzipornayim. We're going to skip the bracket. We're going to come back to that at a different time. Now, at this point, we get to here, mark it, when we get to right here, he's made the following statement, that just like we can understand this concept where the initial idea of the initial idea of this baby that's going to be born goes all the way back, if we work it all the way back to the father's brain, and now it came from the brain, it became sperm, it was in the woman, it was incubated, it became a baby, and from that original DNA, from that original contribution of the man and the woman, what happens? Again, part becomes the brain, part becomes the stomach, etc. Works its way down to the toenails. Now, what's the connection? What's the connection here? V'kacha mamash kivyachol b'shoresh kol nefesh ruach u'neshama sheklalot Yisrael lemala miridato mimadrega lemadrega aydi ishtarshalut haolamot atzilut bria yetzira va'asiya. It's a long sentence, a lot of words. Let's talk what it says. He says, and I'm going to explain this phrase here in a minute, that says, kacha mamash kiviyachol, because it's kind of contradictory. He says, in the same way, we need to understand that the source of every neshama, of every Jew, started off in the highest level by Hashem and went down through a whole chain of worlds, to be explained in a moment, until it became the neshama in you, neshama in me, a different person, neshama, no matter what level that person was. Let me read a couple more lines and we'll have to go back and explain. Kidichtiv, as it says, kulam bechokhma asita, Hashem created everything with wisdom. Nitavu mimenu nefesh, ruach uneshama, shel amei haaretz, upchute ha'erech. That Hashem created the neshamot. All these neshamot came down into this world, even the neshamot that end up in the people who are not the greatest tzaddikim in the world, let's say. A person who's Jewish, by dint of the fact he's Jewish, will have the neshama, but just like the baby that started off in the brain of the man, of the moach, and comes down through time to those 9 months and changes, part becomes the brain and part becomes the toenails, so too, the neshamot that come down to this world, and I have to come back to that idea in a moment, come down into this world. As they come down into the world, become to different neshamot, different levels. Some neshamot are toenails, and some neshamot are brains, and using his mashal. Now, there's a lot here to unpack. Okay, so first, let me clear off this stuff on the screen. Okay. So make it easier to see everything. And get rid of that. Okay, got rid of that. Tough. I'm going to look at a couple of slides tonight from Rav Steinsaltz. And, oops, why did I stop sharing? I wanted to stay sharing. To try to make some sense of a lot of things that the Admor HaZaken is telling us now. But we have to go back first. We started off with the statement. What is the mashal? The mashal is the father's machashavot, leads to the baby, leads to different levels within the same body of the baby, whether it's the brain or the toenails, but we know that both are connected back to the father. So too, the neshamot all began with the machashava of Hashem. They come down into this various series of worlds, to be explained soon. And then some become the neshamot in the toenails they become toenail neshama, and some become brain neshamot. Again, what does this all mean? But before he introduces the nimshal, when he says that just like the mashal, just like the baby is this, so too it is by neshamot, he uses a very unusual statement. He says, kacha mamash kiviyachol. Those are contradictory statements. Why? First of all, Rav Steinsaltz points out, as I've seen, he will use this expression multiple times in Tanya. Hutziruf muzar, it's a strange combination of words. It seems to be a self-evident contradiction. Why? When you say something is kiviyachol, as if, you're using an example, like a mashal or a parable. It doesn't mean that it's really like that. On the other hand, when you say something is actually like that, the kavana is b'diyuk kach. It's not an exaggeration. It means it's exactly like that. So in other words, on the one hand, you have something he says, this connection between the father, brain, child, birth, etc., and Hashem, nishamot, brought down to this world. He says on the one is mamash, actually, and he says it's kiviyachol, as if. So which is it? Here's how we can understand it. Kasher ne'emar shenishmat kol ish Yisrael hi chelek Eloka mima'al. When we say that every neshama is a chelek of Hashem, v'shorasha min ha'chokhmah ha'elokit ha'yona, and its source is God, is the godly wisdom on high. Hakavana hi mamash. That means actually, it is truly that. Ve'ulam, but biyachas lemashal shishtamesh bo kan, relative to the parable he gave, shel ha'av ve'haben, of the father and son, v'shekol havayato shel haben, v'afilu tzipornei raglav kishurim, lemoach ha'av, and that everything in the child, in the body, is connected back to the brain of the father. Urak kiviyachol. That's only the as if perspective. Why? The distance doesn't mean physical, but the distance between the father's brain and the toenails of the child, it's a short distance. You cannot compare that when you talk about the distance between Hashem's machashava and the neshama that comes into us. Meaning, what does it mean? Kain mamash, kiviyachol mamash. So on the one hand, mamash, we are the chelek elokam mimal, but on the other hand, it's kiviyachol. It's as if, because we're really not able to compare completely, because we're talking about astronomical differences in worlds. Okay, I don't need to read the rest of this slide. But let's stop and think for a second before we go on to the next slide. Let's talk. What happens, again, it's very important to get this point to make sure it's very clear, the comparison. The father's machashava, which led to the babies, which led to the head, the middle of the body, the bottom of the body, the toenails. There's a direct connection working its way back. So too, in the heavens, in the highest world, I'm going to use that term very loosely right now, within Hashem's machashava, which brought about the neshama, which came down into this world, where it broke into different neshamot that are toenail neshamot and some that are brain neshamot, and ended up into our bodies. That's the comparison. Now we know, even if you have a rudimentary knowledge of physiology and how the body works, and a very slight understanding of how a baby incubates in the body, it's not the right word, but grows within the body, in the woman's body after conception. And by the way, just parenthetically, if you've never seen the book or seen online, I forgot his last name, Lars something, is a Swedish, I believe Swedish photographer who was one of the first people to actually get intrauterine in vitro pictures of a growing fetus within the mother. It's how a person can look at that and not know that there is absolute chokhmah and Hashem existing is beyond me. But we can understand that. You can see the different progression if you or your wife or your daughter or someone in your family's had the ultrasound pictures, and you see the growth of the baby, and you see the pictures, the movement, you can see that there is growth. And you also know that the hands change from little pads to the fingers becoming identifiable. So there is a process that started all the way back up here and works its way down to a baby and different parts of the body. So too, we just said, it goes down from the upper worlds to here, to this world, where the neshamot go through this process of what is called hishtalshalut ha'olamot, or the chain of worlds. So later on in Tanya, there will be a few terms that will be explained more in depth, but in order just to understand a little bit now, I'm going to mention in the most brief of fashions, because this itself, each one of these lines could be an entire 2-hour shiur. It's going to take us just a minute. You have to take my word for this right now, okay? And we have to understand that there are, in fact, now also understand, we're talking about spiritual. We're not talking physical. We all think and believe, and we all, if I say, okay, where is Hashem, besides being all over, say, oh, it's up, where's Shemayim? Where is Gan Eden? We always look upwards to the heavens, right? So when we talk about the concept of levels of worlds, we're not talking physical. Much later in Tanya, he's going to give us this concept of the amount of distance between these worlds. But again, all that is just spiritual levels. I'm going to mention only briefly that there are actually more than this. There's 6, but right now we're only going to talk about in Tanya these 4. The world of what's called Atzilut, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. Now, the only way I'm going to explain these to you right now in the most basic fashion is I want you just to pretend, okay? You pretend that you're sitting in the Shemayim next to Hashem, in the supernal light that is God. Again, in a spiritual sense. You are in the world of what's called Atzilut. Something happens. It's next level down of world. Spiritual world is called Bria, creation, Yetzira, fashion, and Asiya, doing. What do they really mean? What is going on here? He's not going to deal with this at all yet. But what you need to understand is that when the Alter Rebbe or the Admor Zaken is telling us about Ishtalshalut ha'olamot, things going down from world to world to world, this is what he's referring to, moving from one level to another down to this earth. Again, it's important to understand, we're talking spiritual worlds because the neshama is something spiritual, okay? If you look in your book, you'll see that there's a, or in the text, you'll see that there's a Rashi Tevot, an abbreviation, which is right over, if I'll find it real quick. Right here, let me mark it. This is the Rashi Tevot, or the abbreviation for what we just looked at. It stands for Atzilut, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. You'll notice the words before it, Hishtalshalut ha'olamot. Think of a chain. In a chain, you have, and you're going to see this in Rav Steinsaltz shortly. In a chain, if I take a piece of paper and I cut it circular, and I have this like this one of the things that I can stretch out, the connection from the top to the bottom is the same. They're all part of the same chain. So too, the neshama starts up on high and works its way down into this world when it comes into someone, but it changes on its way down, just like a baby changes its form of what happens to it as it becomes a baby and moving from blastocyst to fetus to baby. So where does this leave us? Let's take a look. Oh, that's not what I want. Okay. I want to go back to the text, sorry. Right, we got to here. Okay, now, it begs the question, if we have these neshamot that have become called toenail neshamot, the lower rung, the neshama is the neshama elokit. The neshama is as pure as it can be. It is the neshama elokit, which we're going to discuss much more in depth later. But it's in a person that is the level of a toenail. So how do they get their sustenance? How do they get their connection to Hashem? It sounds like the deck is stacked against them already. Take a look what he says over here. Ki yanikat v'chiyut nefesh ruach u'neshama shel amei haaretz hu minefesh ruach u'neshama shel hatzadikim v'achachamim rashei b'nei Yisrael shebedoram. Where does the neshama of these lower level individuals get its sustenance from? Their chiyut, their neshama gets it from the tzadikim and the chachamim of their generation. Again, this requires explanation. Let's do it in a very simplistic way. If I ask you, how do you, if I take a needle or a pin and I poke your toe, how do you know, where does it that, I mean, you feel it in your toe, you feel that pain, but where does that, what allows you to feel that pain? It's your brain, right? Your brain firing off synapses and you have these receptors of pain in your body. Thank God Hashem gave us this ability to feel pain, because otherwise we would have a lot of problems. We could burn ourselves easily, we could hurt ourselves easily, but the toe is down, the foot's all the way on the bottom, right? If I stub my toe in the middle of the night when I get out of bed, then where did my body down there get the sustenance, so to speak, to have that pain receptor? It goes all the way back to the brain. So the Admar Zaken is telling us that these neshamot, these tzipornaim neshamot, so to speak, using his terminology, get their sustenance from the tzaddikim, or the chachamim of the generation, the tzaddikim of the generation. How do we know? How do we understand that? Because there's this concept of every generation is a koma. If you can picture all the Jews alive at a given moment as one continuous long chain, tzaddikim on top, again, we're talking spiritually, tzaddikim on top, working their way down, all connected, this whole chain, not only the chain of the neshamot that came originally from heaven, but all the entire generation, top to bottom, is one unit. Then the neshamot on the bottom are getting their sustenance from the neshama, from the tzaddikim at the top. Now, what does this do for us? This is one of the credos, one of the major fundamental beliefs in Chassidut. Let me read you what Rav Aviner, I keep saying Rav Aviner, what Rav Steinsaltz tells us. Nekuda zo, the idea that every neshama gets its sustenance now from the gedolim, from the tzaddikim, which then they get it from Hashem also. Nekuda zo hi habasis l'chol inyan hatzadikut. This concept of the tzaddik or the Rebbe, it doesn't mean that the Rebbe or the tzaddik is a bigger Talmid Chacham, but rather that neshama, that individual, is truly like the head of Israel. Hatzibura mitkasher elav הם אותם אנשים שמרגישים את הקשר הזה של ראש ואיברים, שהם יונקים ממנו ושהוא קשור עליהם בקשר הזה. The same thing, the same way you have a connection between your brain, your head, and your left big toe, is the same kesher that you have between your neshama and the tzaddikim of the generation. לא רק האיברים, גם ראש קצוץ אינו יכול לחיות, not just the limbs, even a chopped off head couldn't just live. Hold on. Yeah, that's it. That's for that slide. Okay. So what's he telling us here? He's telling us, number one, there's the hishtalshalut alamot. The nefshamot came down to this world. Remember, focus. We're on the neshama elokit. Super important to keep this straight. We're not talking about nefesh bahamit now at all. Nefesh elokit starts off in the machashava Hashem, comes down through the hishtalshalut ha'olamot, comes into this world, goes into every Jew. And as it does that, it also goes down and levels into that person, different people, and those people in a reverse fashion get their sustenance from those above them, who get it directly also from Hashem. But we're still all connected back to Kadosh Baruch Hu. Let's go back to the text. Okay, we have just one word on this page, uvazes. Let's go to the next page. Now make it bigger. Uvaze yuvan ma'amar Razal al pasuk. And now with this, we can also understand what Chazal, what Chachamenu Zichronam Livracha told us, and the pasuk that says uledovka bo, that we should cling to him, meaning Hashem. What does that mean? Shekol hadavek betalmid chacham, that whoever clings to a talmid chacham, ma'aleh alav katuv ki'ilu nidbak b'shchina mamash. It's as if he's clinging to Hashem himself, literally. Why? Ki al yedei devika b'talmidei chachamim, a person who gets close to a talmid chacham, keshurot nefesh ruach uneshama shel amei haaretz, umiuchadot b'mahutan harishon, v'shorasham shebechochma ila'a, shu yitparach v'chochmato ila'a, v'hu hamada. What does all these words mean?
Can I ask a question about
one second. I want to make sure I finish this thought. So, we know the Gemara discusses. What do you mean the dovka Hashem? How do you cling together? He's eshochelet, and wrong glasses. He's eshochelet. Hashem is a consuming fire, so to speak. You can't. How are you supposed to cling to that to Hashem? So it says that the Chazal tell us that it means that when you cling, when you cleave to, when you connect to Talmidei Chachamim, then you're cleaving and connecting directly to Hashem as well through the Talmid Chacham. This forms, as I said, part of the basis of why within Hasidut, the Rebbe of that Hasidut is so important. He's not the only one. Doesn't mean, again, he's not a bigger Talmid Chacham, he's not a big, but he has a higher level neshama, and you get sustenance of your neshama from that neshama as well. If it's a short question, please ask it, because I want to make sure I finish the thought here. Go ahead.
Question is short, but it's not simple to answer, because Uladavka Bo, I know that very well because it's from the Maftir of Ekev, my parasha. And it's clear from the context of the Pshat that it's talking about Hashem directly. And there are two things that I think that we have the tradition that we shouldn't have any interlopers between us and Hashem. So why is he putting a Talmid Chacham between us and Hashem?
Excellent. He's not.
Even
So thank you. I'm glad you asked it. I hear your question.
Of the Catholic Church.
I hear your question. I was anticipating someone asking that. Okay. So
Okay.
I'm going to put everybody back on mute, and I'm going to try and answer it to the best of my ability. I'm going to add one layer to that question. If it wasn't clear what his question was, it sounds like the Admor Zaken is saying, well, go through your Rebbe and you're going to get closer to God. We don't need intermediaries. As a matter of fact, there's a paragraph in Slichot by Ashkenazim that many omit, that is where we ask.
Rachamim, I was going to mention that too.
Machisei Rachamim, where people leave it out because it sounds like you're actually asking these intermediaries to go to Hashem on your behalf. So I'm going to add one part of the question, then I'll answer it. It is very common for people to go to Kivrei Tzadikim, to daven. Unfortunately, some people make a very big mistake when they go, and they daven to the tzaddik. Chas v'sholom. You're never davening to the tzaddik. You're davening at a holy place because you believe that tzaddik's neshama has a higher level connection to Hashem than you do. And you are, in a sense, riding those coattails, to use a modern term, to get to access a higher level of a neshama to help your neshama connect to Hashem. You are not using the tzaddik as your intermediary to get to God. You're using you're connecting your neshama to that neshama on its way, which is the same one that has its original place in Hashem. It's your chelak elokam imal plus that person's chelak elokam imal, right with Hashem anyways. Now, what you're saying are going to be discussed later again in Tanya. Not that much later, but will be discussed later. So right now, I want to just use that as the answer to your question. Great question, because I was anticipating it. But let's continue, and we'll see at a later date how that really plays in, because he's going to talk obviously about this because it's a fundamental principle within Chassidut. We're going to skip the parentheses. I'm going to go to here. Now, I want to explain something that I want to just make sure before I do. I want to make sure I didn't skip something. It was an idea I wanted to make sure I mentioned to you. Hold on. Where is about the Achorayim? Interesting. Okay. Let me come back to here. Now, I don't want to skip the parentheses. I'm going to come back there, but there's two words here that I don't see on my screen. Okay, let's continue with the parentheses. This is all well and good if the person seeks out the tzaddik. This is all well and good when a person tries to get close to Talmid Chacham. Again, this is even just for Hasidim. This is for anybody. Put Hasidut aside. Whether it comes to education, whether it comes to getting closer to Hashem, whatever, the more a person tries to be closer to a Talmid Chacham, to a tzaddik, the better it is for their neshama. But what about people who have absolutely no interest? They have nothing. They have no connection. Not only they don't have a connection to a tzaddik, couldn't care less. Where does their neshama get their sustenance? Where's this? How does it grow? Look in parentheses. Those who are negligent and rebel against Talmidei Chachamim, which doesn't just mean they just don't care. They just don't have anything, want to have anything to do with the Talmid Chacham or Torah. Yinikat nefesh ruach uneshama shalahem, the sustenance of their neshama comes mibechinat achorayim shel nefesh ruach uneshama nishmat Talmid Chacham. Comes from the back of the neshama of the Talmid Chacham. Okay, that sounds really clear. Let me explain to you what that is. Actually, let's have Rav Steinsaltz tell us, and then I'll use my words. I should make this smaller so it can actually fit in the screen. Okay. When a person turns his back on somebody, I can be right next to somebody else, theoretically. If my back is turned to them, I can still be right next to them, very close. But I'm still very far away and distant. How? You come to talk to me, and what do? I turn my back on you. As soon as I turn my back on you, I'm as far away from you as possible. Not physically, but as emotionally, spiritually. I have turned my back on you physically, literally, and figuratively. If they stand face to face, they're very close. Again, in more than just physical sense. And in many senses, it's a very close connection when they're standing close face to face. If they turn their backs on each other, in spite of the fact that they're close physically, they're as far away as possible from each other. Doing tshuva, for example, is a change in direction where a person turns. He turns back to God. A person who rebels against the heads of Am Yisrael of his generation, even if he has no desire to receive sustenance from their neshama to his, he still cannot completely disconnect from them. Because he's Jewish, he is still connected to them by the fact that, remember, this koma, this one unbreakable chain of people in the generation. Just like our physical limbs get its sustenance from our brain. If I say to my hand, I don't want you to get any sustenance from my brain at all, nothing. It doesn't do anything. You can't change the mitzvot that it does. The one who rebels against the leaders of Israel doesn't want that connection. What does he do? Spiritually, he turns his back on the leaders. It's impossible to not get sustenance from them. Their sustenance only comes from the back of the tzaddik's neshama. It's a term used throughout a large part, a good part of Tanya will come across this concept of getting the sustenance from the achorayim. It is still a connection. It is still getting yinika from the Talmid Chacham, and then, of course, Hashem. But it is a different type of yinika. How is it affected? Again, it's yet to be seen. Now, what I do want to mention,
one more short question.
Yes.
On the back-to-back parable.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed to me to contradict what we learned about Briat Adam, that he was originally created Zachar and Nekeva, and Hashem cut them in two so that they could face each other, and in order to try and work on being close again, making a couple. So it seems to me that it's precisely the opposite of what the Admor says here. That
Why?
Because at the beginning, back to back, Zachar and Nekeva were not far away from each other. They were too close, and Hashem cut them apart in order to get back again.
So you're comparing physical and spiritual.
true. So is the Admor when he talks about everything going down to the toenail from the
I
brain.
understand, but your comparison of saying back to back, first of all, it's okay. I hear what you're saying, but it's not. You can't compare the two. Why is going to take me too long to explain? Let me just make it real brief. It says Zachar Nekeva Bira'am, right? And they say it was back to back, and Hashem split them. Okay,
Right.
that had no connection whatsoever to the idea of turning your back on somebody. None. When we're talking about is an action that I take, and I turn. If you came to my house to visit, and I see you walk in, and I turn my back on you, it's very different than Hashem creating Adam and Chava back to back. It's a very different thing. Okay.
Okay.
Good. Okay. Now, what I want to mention is that the next paragraph to the end of the chapter, which I'm going to read next week, I thought I'd finish tonight, is actually not in original Tanya. I don't know at what point. I have to find out. I don't know at what point it was added. What we're going to do, we're going to read it next week from right here where it says Umashe Katuv Zohar down to here. I'm going to start next week with that paragraph, Bezrat Hashem. We're only going to spend a couple minutes on translating what it means, because until much later, it's not going to make to us a great deal of difference, but it is very important because it's in Tanya. We're going to read it, okay? But that would be Bezrat Hashem next week. We'll finish up the first 5 minutes, hopefully finish up chapter 2, move into chapter 3. One thing that's also important to note, a couple of things, and I purposely didn't do this yet. At some point, I'll start pointing out as we enter sections that there are groups of chapters that go together. For example, chapters 4 to 6 will form a unit. For example, the anatomy of the soul. We're going to talk about that. There's going to be a group of 8 chapters later on that deal with simcha, with happiness and joy. There are going to be other chapters that deal with Ahavat Yisrael. Okay, they're groups. The first 3 chapters form this basis of our knowledge of what Tanya is about the Neshama Elokit, Neshama Bahamit. That's the first 3 chapters. And then we're going to move into, like I say, the anatomy of the soul. That's first of all. Second of all, I also want to tell you, based on a couple of conversations I've had over the last few days with at least 2 of you, this is not, it's really important to understand that this is not Mesilat Yesharim or Chot Tzadikim, Derech Hashem. This is not a how-to manual you just open up and start reading, as I mentioned a long time ago. I'm going to pick up something and read about what does it mean to be an anav, be humble. Or I'm going to pick up the book and I'm going to read about how do I work on being more zariz. Doesn't work that way in Tanya. It is chapter A leads to B, to C, to D. It's all connected beginning to end. You can't jump around. You can only move forward. You can go back and review, but you can't start one place and then go backwards because it builds on itself. It's not a quick fix. It's not a one chapter is going to answer all the questions. It's over time. This is the long haul. This is not a sprint. This is whatever the opposite of a sprint is, the long run. It's what do you call a marathon? It's a marathon. Okay. So just give you a little word of encouragement that if, again, to try and absorb some of these ideas, let's see, I'm going to read something here. Turn on, not rejecting. Okay. A comment, turning one's back figuratively is ignoring, like of a limb, pelagic limb, like paraplegic or pelagic limb that doesn't work, is not rejecting. Right. Very good. I like that. Very good. Okay.
I think about your explanation, I interpret it as being the fact that when Adam and Chava were created together, they were basically still one single entity. Whereas one person comes to another person and one of them turns his back on the other, they are 2 separate entities. And the one turning his back is showing, I don't want anything to do with the other entity. Good.
That's also a good answer. That's also good. And also, we're going to be dealing with Adam actually quite a bit, but you can't, by the way, you cannot modify the word unique. I would say the most unique, but it is unique. It is the unique creation of all creation, which is obvious on many levels, but some that are not. Sorry?
That's Habriya, Adam.
Correct. Correct. Okay. We're going to stop here. Bezrat Hashem, pick it up next Tuesday night. Meantime, do yourself a favor.
Can I ask a quick question?
Even if it's not quick.
So like if you have a neshama that you know or suspect is a toenail neshama, like do you just have to like, oh well, that's just it, that's who
Suck
I
it
am?
up.
Like, I don't know. Are you supposed to sort of aspire to like, I don't know, be a heart neshama, or like you just go through life being a toenail?
No, you don't go through life. You don't have to go through life being a toenail. Your answer is going to come up in the middle of Tanya, Bezrat Hashem. That's why I say this is the marathon. This is exactly the type of question you should be asking. It sounds like, I'm a toenail neshama. What do I have to aspire for? I'll be a toenail, fine. So I'll put my daven and I'll just plod through life and go through it. But no. Okay, excellent question. Very good.
Anyway, I think to go straight from the toenail to the heart's a much of a jump. You have to go first to the heel, and then the calf, and
We'll
the knee.
see why
and
he
it's
specifically.
like
We'll
that.
see later why he specifically chose toenail. There's a reason for it. So,
Okay.
Tov, have a good evening, everybody. Be well.
Yes, shakor. Toda rabba.
This theme.